video recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note that this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend the public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you've left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. Thank you. Can I ask if there are any appointments of substitutes, Julian?
Chair, we haven't got any substitute. Sorry, we do have a substitute. Let me get my facts right. Yeah, we've got James Stanley is here, substitute from Councillor Ditter this afternoon. Just say, I think we're missing Jill DeSera at the moment. And sorry, and Owen Cleary as well. I'm not sure where they are, but they were in the room just a few minutes ago.
They were in the room. I didn't see them. Okay, well, we'll continue anyway because it's gone 1:30. Do we have any declarations of interest? I've got Councillor Roberts.
I think for all of us, members of the public might raise an eyebrow if we didn't say that we all know Councillor Aladitt, who's intimately involved with the Muslim cemetery.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. I've got Councillor Lewin. Have you turned your microphone on?
For the application for the racecourse, if I sit out for that one because I have a previous other council meetings objected to development at that.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Appreciate that. Anyone else? I will also step out for the racecourse agenda item, as I'm the council's nominated member on the racecourse board, and therefore, in the eyes of the public, that would probably be inappropriate. And Councillor Agar, as the deputy chair, is kindly going to take over at that point. Minutes of the previous meeting. Do we have any comments or questions on the minutes of the previous meeting? In which case, I'll accept those as a true record. Julian, I don't have a copy to sign, but I'll do that afterwards. Oh, they are. Thank you. It's right in front of me. I did them, as my wife would call a man look. Apologies. They're signed. Thank you very much. Minutes of the conservation panel. Any comments regarding those? Okay, we'll note those minutes and move on. We have done a site visit this morning, just so the public are aware. We visited both the Muslim cemetery application site and also the Purderswell office block site as well. Do we have any public participation?
Chair, we have no public participation and we have no public representations on any of the applications either.
Excellent. So we'll move straight on to agenda item 8. Oh, yeah, we've done the minutes. Signed them.
Chair, just to say, Councillor Cleary is still missing at the moment. Do you want me to try and locate him before we start debating the application?
That would... Oh, sorry, I've just received a text. So, Councillor Cleary sends his apologies. His little boy's not very well. Okay. Thank you very much. We'll move on to agenda item 8, which is the application for 20 Old Northwick Lane. And Charlotte, are you doing that one? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application made in outline form for the principle of one dwelling on the application site and includes means of access. It does not include other matters which are for later consideration, which are layout, scale, appearance and landscaping. The application is presented to committee following a ward member referral. The site location plan shows the application site outlined in red, and in blue other land which is in the same ownership but does not form part of this application. The blue land currently comprises a detached bungalow with a detached garage in the foregarden. The site lies between residential development on the western side of Lucerne Close and the former Old Northwick Farm in an established residential suburb. It falls within the Riverside Conservation Area and an archaeological sensitive area. There are listed buildings and locally listed buildings in the vicinity. The larger scale site plan includes the existing vegetation and the outline of a timber summer house located to the northern part of the application site. The site is approximately 26 metres wide and 37 metres in length, excluding the access driveway, and it slopes down from the east to the west and more gradually from the south to the north. These plans show the proposal in context, with the South Worcestershire Development Plan allocation plan on the left-hand side, which incorporates the application site, and also the extant permission for residential development, which is currently being built out on the right-hand side plan. By virtue of the application site being within this housing allocation, the principle of residential development on the site is established. Furthermore, it is clearly within an established residential area where typically, subject to compliance with other relevant topic-based policies, the principle of residential development would be acceptable. The allocation is for an indicative 54 new dwellings and the extant permission is for 62. As the allocation figure is indicative, and in light of the objective to boost the supply of housing, the exceedance of the indicative number of units does not undermine the acceptability of the principle of residential development in this case. Although located to the rear of an existing dwelling, development of the site for one dwelling would not be conspicuously out of character to the existing grain of development in the area, bearing in mind its context. The matter of access is included in the consideration of this outline application, and the plan shows the proposed amendments to the existing access which currently serves number 20, and also the application site to the rear. These include increasing the length of the drop curb, widening the existing driveway to 3.5 metres, which would be achieved through the potential removal of vegetation along the eastern boundary. The County Highways Authority has confirmed that this would provide safe access for two dwellings. Indicative parking and turning is also shown to serve the existing property number 20, and the full specification details of these will be subject to a condition as recommended by the Highways Authority if outline planning permission is granted. Although, as can be seen, the site comprises a backland development, it is considered as set out in the report that due to the distance separation with number 18 and the intervening outbuilding and boundary treatments, the uplift in the use of the access would not be materially harmful to the occupier's living conditions. Whilst the access to serve the proposed dwelling is relatively close to number 20, a new boundary treatment is indicated, and as this property falls in the same ownership as the application site, the impacts would not be imposed on an existing third-party occupier. As advised, other than establishing the principle of development for one dwelling and access, this outline application does not seek approval for layout, which has been reserved for future consideration. This plan is therefore purely indicative and submitted to demonstrate that the site is capable of accommodating a dwelling. Similarly, these plans and sections are for indicative purposes only and do not preempt the scale, layout and appearance of the dwelling if outline planning permission is granted. Those reserved matters would be subject to a subsequent application or applications. Mindful of the difference in land levels between the application site and the neighbouring sites, a condition is recommended requiring existing and proposed levels, finished floor levels, eaves and ridge heights of both the proposed and the neighbouring dwellings to all be submitted at reserved matters stage to enable a thorough assessment to be made at that juncture. This photograph shows the existing site access with number 18 on the right and then the garage and bungalow at number 20 on the left-hand side. The trees to the front of the garage are shown to be retained and those to the right of the access driveway are in the ownership of number 18. This is a view from the access looking east along the old Northwick Lane. And the next one is looking southwest along Norfolk Lane to show the visibility displays achievable from the existing access. This is a view along the access driveway which would serve the application site, with the mixed vegetation on the right-hand side which would be removed to facilitate its widening. The existing summer house can be seen in the distance, just about, I think, at the far end of the site. Again, a view along side number 20, showing the vegetation and the existing boundary to the rear garden. This is a view looking towards the north and western boundaries, with the new builds on the rest of the allocated site on the left-hand side. And members can note the lower levels there with the first floor windows looking across the application site. This is a view towards the eastern boundary, and again it indicates the higher ground levels and the existing boundary treatment, with the summer house at the rear end of the site. This is a view back towards the rear garden of number 20, which is in the applicant's ownership, and these trees have been identified as category A and B trees and are to be retained. The submitted arboricultural impact assessment proposes protective barrier fencing to be provided throughout the construction phase, and condition 14 in the late papers would control its implementation. And finally, this is a view back towards the access driveway and number 20. To conclude, the residential development is considered acceptable in principle by virtue of the development plan allocation and also due to the site location in an established residential area. Despite being essentially backland site, absent of a planning policy to prevent such developments, it must be assessed on its merits and any resulting impacts. Given the context of the surrounding development, it's considered that a dwelling on this site would not be discernibly discordant, and the uplift in comings and goings from the access would not be harmful to amenity. The access, subject to the proposed modifications, has been confirmed to be acceptable by the Highways Authority, and the site can accommodate suitable off-road parking and turning for both the existing and the proposed dwellings, subject to conditions requiring full details and provision of such prior to the first occupation of the new dwelling. The site is considered to be of sufficient size that, subject to a carefully prepared reserve matters detail of scale, layout, appearance and landscaping, it would not materially impinge on the living conditions of neighbouring dwellings, whilst also achieving a good standard of living for its future occupiers. Similarly, the impact on the conservation area is capable at reserve matter stage of being neutral, which accords with legislative and policy requirements. Potential archaeological interests can be protected by condition as recommended. The reserve matter submission will also include drainage details to ensure that the layout makes best provision for SUDs and biodiversity enhancement. Overall, the proposal is considered to accord with the development plan when taken as a whole, and there are no material planning considerations to indicate that decisions should be made otherwise. It is therefore recommended that outline planning permission with access included should be granted, subject to the conditions in the report, and also I draw members' attention to the late papers, which I should have mentioned at the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. The array of photographs were very helpful, I think, for members. So we've got to see a really good visibility of that site. You have made it very clear, but I'll just remind members, this is not for a planning application. This is an outline, i.e. a formal planning application, if we approve today, would come back with the actual building, whatever that may look like, just so people are aware. So I open floor questions. I've got Mel.
A comment really, it's just to say we've had obviously in this area it's been very conscious build coming just alongside just where this property is, and we've had some other issues with footpaths where previous planning permissions have been brought to the forefront. So I'm just grateful for the time and to bring this forward and to have the transparency of planning committee for this, particularly with the context.
Thank you, Mel.
We can't hear what's being said, I'm sorry.
Yeah, get the speakers sorted, no problem. Any other questions or comment? I've got one from Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you're still in the chair. Just a couple of points, if I may. I'm always a little bit suspicious when it's just an outline and everything else is going to come later, because we know what that actually means. You get permission in principle, and then we know in reality it's very difficult then to get a planning application and say, well, you're not entitled to planning permission because you've already got outline, so therefore it's just a question of just agreeing the details. Except in this case, there seem to be an awful lot of details that would have to be determined. And it's really under the third-party comments, because as you know, I always listen to what residents say, because it's their community, it's their outlook that's being affected. And what some of the residents have said is that, in terms of their objections, about existing bungalows that surround the site, so, and therefore they are concerned that should whatever's going to be built is obviously not a bungalow. It then refers to problems with the sewage system. They said there have been backup problems very recently. And again, the last point they refer to, which is about the height, and talking about the site is subject to an historic legal agreement restricting it to single-storey development only. And again, the thing that bothers me there, Mr. Chairman, is that we will say, well, we're granting planning permission. Then if there's a legal dispute, then it's up to the residents to sort that out. So the consequence of our decision, for example, to grant planning permission in principle and in fact, is then the residents have to be engaged in legal expenses to maintain their rights, which is the direct consequence of our decision. So I'm never happy with that, because I don't think that's fair. I know it isn't for us, but the consequences are, for the residents. So there are consequences for our decision. So I would like some reassurance or clarification on those points, because I don't know what's going to be built there, and therefore just to give permission in principle is a little bit unsettling into the unknown. And again, it does come back to background development. I mean, this area presumably is open space for a reason. It hasn't been built on, or wasn't originally built on, for a reason. And here, just because it exists doesn't mean we should build on it or allow building to be put on it. So they are my questions and comments, Chairman.
No, I will ask officers to go to the detail, but I will remind Councillor Amos that the land is in the South Worcestershire Development Plan as land to be built upon. So that we as a council, along with Malvern and Wychavon 5 or 6 years ago, adopted this land with the full knowledge that it was land we were putting up to meet our housing requirement. So that's just a reminder and a point of fact. But I'll ask officers if they. No,
Mr. Chairman, you're absolutely right to remind me of that. You're absolutely right to remind me of that.
But it doesn't help you.
But then, of course, I would remind you that if something is not in the SWDP, we're told, well, it doesn't matter, we can still build on it. So I'm being very consistent by saying, well, just because it's in the SWDP doesn't mean we have to build on it.
No, I take your point. But officers, did you get all those questions? Yeah. Good.
Thank you, Chair. My response to that would be that obviously an outline application is a well-established form of application in the planning process. When if outline planning permission is granted, the reserve matters would be scrutinised against the same policies in the development plan and the national planning policy framework, and we would look very carefully at the layout, the scale, the appearance and the landscaping. So it's just a two-stage process. It doesn't mean it would be scrutinised in any less of a way rather than a full application. It's just a two-tier process instead. In terms of sewage, I'm not aware of any capacity issues that have arisen. There are no responses on the application from Severn Trent, but I'm not sure that they would be consulted on an application for one dwelling. And in terms of the legal agreement, as again, Councillor Amos has accepted that that's not something within the planning authority's considerations, and it would be for whoever imposed that restrictive covenant to enforce it if they saw fit to do so.
I think there was one further question in there, correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor Amos, and it was referenced the height of the land in the bungalow covenant. I don't know whether we have details on whether there is such a covenant, but I would say that it's a question I asked in the Chairman's briefing, and hopefully the land topography demonstrated that a two-storey building would be the equivalent of a bungalow. I know that's not the plan in terms of putting it, because the land drops away, and I don't know whether we can go back to a couple of those images which would hopefully make that clear to members in terms of topography. Okay, we can't, that's no problem. I hope you can all remember. I've got James. But do you want to bring anything more to that question?
Just a little addition to that, in that, just to remind members that at this stage it is an outline application for one dwelling, and we're not here to preempt whether that will be single or two-storey. When there is, if outline planning permission is granted, the reserve matters will come in and will provide all those details in terms of cross-sections across the site, so that officers can make a thorough assessment of whether the dwelling would be appropriate in terms of its height, in relation to the built form in the area, but also in terms of its relationship with the neighbouring properties, where the windows would be located, which elevations, all those things would be looked at thoroughly at that time. So the purposes of the plans today to just to demonstrate that a dwelling could be located on that site with sufficient parking, turning and garden area.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got James Stanley.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. The location or the existence or otherwise of that covenant, I think, would be quite a useful exercise in finding that out. Historically, it was part of conversations going back a number of years now, and whether or not it's actually come to light since then, whether it adds anything to this going forward, I wouldn't know. But I'm aware of the fact that it's something that's been part of previous conversations.
And I think I'd agree with you if it was a formal planning application for a building. But at the moment, as we've been highlighted, the application that comes forward might be a bungalow. We don't know. We're pure. But you make a good point, James, that at that point, officers, I'm sure, will have to have a look at that. I'm getting a twitch of no or yes.
No, Chairman, I'm afraid that's not correct, because it falls outside of the planning remit. That's a land law issue, and I'm sure I don't step on Georgina's toes.
I didn't get a kick earlier, so I assumed I was right.
It's similar, perhaps if I can draw the example, it's similar that you could grant planning permission for something that wouldn't meet building regulations. They're separate things, and we just have to stick within the remit of the planning application. So we could grant permission for something that there was a restrictive covenant that would prevent, but that would be for the person that imposed that covenant to then enforce, and that's for the risk for the applicant to take. Thank you.
I love it when planning's straightforward. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Charlotte, for that clarification. I've got Mel.
I've made one comment, so just one quick question. Obviously, it is an outline planning application, but in the past, I've had concerns from residents. Can you clarify at any point, has there another application been submitted for detailed planning and withdrawn, or are you not allowed to say if it's not a final application?
It should be under the previous planning.
No.
Got nothing there. There's nothing under previous planning history, Mel, in the paper. My memory's correct.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Chairman. At section 5, there's no previous planning history at all on this site. And if I can, just while I'm speaking, there is members mentioned earlier in terms of foul drainage. Just draw your attention to condition 10, which requires a detailed foul and surface water drainage strategy to be submitted with the reserve matters. So members will have the opportunity to be able to scrutinise those drainage requirements as part of the reserve matters application.
So on the basis that I'm not seeing any further questions, do we have a proposer for the recommendation as presented by officers with the late paper? I've got Marjorie, thank you very much, and a seconder, I've got Pat. So therefore, those in favour of the application before us, please raise your hand.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Those against?
None.
And those abstentions?
1.
Thank you very much. We now move on to agenda, so that is approved, including the late paper. We now move on to agenda item 9. Is that you as well, Charlotte? Or is it Paul, isn't it? By the way, I apologise, everybody, members. I should have introduced Paul earlier on. He's new to the team as his first planning committee. So I'd say be gentle with him, but that's never going to happen. So, but he's brought his flak jacket with him, so I'm sure he's prepared. All yours, Paul.
I hope not, Councillor Amos. I'm sure we can get accustomed to each other. I may need a little help, Julian. The clicker seems to have.
Yeah. First time I've been told off by Charlotte. I think it's the first time I've been told off by Charlotte. I'm used to it from these two. If members of the public are listening in, we're just rebooting the IT system so that members of the committee and public who are in present can see the presentation. Go on, I can tell a joke. Keep up. Agenda item 9, Muslim Cemetery, John Conwyn Drive. Thank you. Paul, yours.
Julian, do you want to start with the slideshare, the slideshow?
Yeah, should
Okay. Yes. Well, that's backwards. Okay.
yeah, we're good, yeah.
So, members, this application relates to land which is in the ownership of the City Council and is situated off John Conwyn Drive. It's situated northwest of Purdiswell Park and also bounded by the City Council's depot building to the southwest, allotments to the north and offices at Purdiswell Park to the south. The site in part contains a storage area in association with the depot to the rear, with the remaining being unused overgrown space. The existing cemetery was granted planning permission by this council and this committee in 2020. Just go through some photos of the site. This is the existing cemetery looking into the office blocks at Purdiswell Park. At Purdiswell Park. This is the council depot building to the right-hand side. Again, looking back towards the rear of the existing cemetery site, and the proposal is to extend beyond that rear boundary. That's looking again at the other side of the rear boundary and looking over the fence into that rear overgrown boundary space. This is the access track which leads into the existing cemetery, which will be extended as part of the proposals. And looking to the office block then across the way. That's the side of the council block, the council building, and again looking across the cemetery. This is the access onto John Conwyn Drive and the existing parking space, which is currently used both by the cemetery and also by council operatives as part of the depot facilities. And that's another view of the access track. This is looking into the space at the rear, the storage area, and you can see the storage building which is used by the City Council. This is the access to the rear, and I'll take you on a little journey on the access track which members walked this morning. And so you can see Purdiswell Park to the left, and we traverse down here and back onto the access drive, which then leads onto the Droitwich Road. You can see in the background the access gates, which are controlled and locked by the City Council when not in use. That's the access that takes us through back to the Droitwich Road. And you can see, you can see the traffic lights in the distance, which we had a look at on the committee site visit. This is an aerial photo of the application site, and you can see the storage depot to the south, and you can see the existing cemetery to the west. It's just looking from a different direction. And this is an earlier aerial photo to show the area which was being excavated by the City Council for making that area of storage compound. The original submission as part of this application related to a much larger extension to the cemetery, which resulted in a number of technical issues. The current proposal before members is revised and the site area has been reduced, so that now the proposal now relates to the extension of the cemetery by approximately 72%, along with the creation of a peace garden, cemetery office and car parking area. The site falls wholly within the green space allocation under policy 38 and also within the green belt, where policy SWDP2 directs decisions should be taken in line with national planning policy in the NPPF in relation to green belt. The officer's report sets out how the development is appropriate development in the green belt and will not result in harm to the openness of the green belt or to the green space allocation. 2 buildings are proposed. One is the main administration building, which you can see in elevation and footprint form on the screen, and its location is ringed on the site plan. The second is a pavilion building, which is located within the Peace Garden, which is there for use in an informal way. The access to the site will be provided in the main from John Conwyn Drive and from the access to the south, both coming direct from the Droitwich Road. The access to the south provides a link to National Cycle Route 45, which you can see it's a local cycle route. It's not a national cycle route, it's just a local link onto the main 45. The access from John Conwyn Drive will provide a regular access for the cemetery for regular visits, administration, maintenance and associated visits. It will be the main access for hearses, and 5 car parking spaces are provided for those regular visits and for the administration building. The access to the south will be utilised for funerals only. The access track is owned by the City Council and is gated. The access track and gate will be continued to be controlled by the City Council, with access only being provided during funeral events. The applicant has confirmed that based on previous years that the maximum number of funerals will be 12, and a condition is recommended accordingly. 26 car parking spaces are provided at the southern access points, which are for funeral events. A site management plan has been offered by the applicants, and it is included within the recommended conditions. This will provide management of events and burials in accordance with the advice of the technical consultees. Comments were received yesterday from the Public Rights of Way team at the County Council, which now withdraws their objection, and it will also note that the Highway Authority raised no objections subject to conditions. Part of the site is located within flood zone 3, although the modelling exercise which has been conducted by the applicant's consultants has shown that in reality this is in flood zone 2. All burials will take place outside flood zone 2 in flood zone 1, so outside any area at risk for flooding, and also above the groundwater source protection zone. And you can see on the cross-section, which is taken from the contamination report, that the existing burials and the proposed burials, and there is that 28.7 metre contour line, that is the limit of where it is safe to be able to carry out burials. And that is shown within the most recent revised plan, which shows the limit for the burials that can take place. It should be noted by members that there are no objections in respect of flood risk or groundwater contamination. One objection has been received from a business at Acton House in respect of parking and being able to view the cemetery operations. The site is separated from Acton House by approximately 20 metres, and views of the existing cemetery can be seen from that building, and members on site this morning both appreciated that view and also the view looking across the car park to see the separation distance between the building. The comments in respect of parking and traffic movements have already been rehearsed, although it is noted that John Conwyn Drive has a double yellow lines for its entirety, and I note the comments that were made by members on site this morning in respect of its use during the weekends. Matters of ecology have been fully investigated as part of the submission and found that revised proposals will not result in any harm to protected species. However, given the time since the initial survey work, a further survey has been requested, and unfortunately it is not available for members today, but it will follow shortly, and therefore it is recommended that delegated authority be given, subject to no new issues being arisen during the consideration of the application. And so therefore, in conclusion, the proposal represents appropriate development in the Greenbelt. It is suitable development within the green space allocation. The access and parking arrangements are acceptable for regular activity and also for funeral events. The proposed additional Peace Garden and the car parking spaces are acceptable development in the flood risk area, and burials will not result in risk to groundwater. The application is recommended for delegated approval, subject to the receipt of an updated ecological assessment and no new issues being identified, and also for the conditions set out within the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Paul. For those members who weren't able to make the site recce this morning, I did ask the question when I was there regarding the office block and the cemetery, and which was there first regarding the overlooking. And the cemetery was there before they built the office block. So just to people who were wondering. I'll now open the agenda item for debate or questions. I've got one from Mel.
Chair, thank you. I know earlier, whilst we've been sort of walked through the application, that it referred to 12 expected burials. That seems, with all due respect, you know, in 2018, you know, we didn't know about the pandemic. I'm a little unsure how we can guarantee 12 expected burials and why that is relative to a planning application. It does seem quite odd, personally speaking.
Thank you for the question. This has been put forward by the applicant. It is not a burial ground for all. It is for specific families, and they have, over the last few years, had events that have been far less than the 12. And yes, there has been an increase over the last 2 years, which is all expected. They are content that the 12 is a limit that they can certainly deal with. In terms of the relevance to planning, it is part of the discussions with the Highway Authority that they are satisfied with that level of activity on the access road to the south as part of the funerals. So they are content with 12. They would certainly be concerned if there were to be a larger number than that, but the applicant has put forward the 12 and that has been agreed with them. They are satisfied that they can deal with that as part of a planning condition.
I can sense a secondary question there, Mel.
Chair, thank you. Yes, just an obvious follow-on. I guess with this, if that isn't the case, obviously, you know, this is a very sensitive subject, sensitive area. But if there are more 12 burials, then would the council then take enforcement action, and how appropriate would that be? Thank you.
Thank you for your follow-up question, and that was certainly a discussion without prejudice that was taking place on site, and we went through and rehearsed those issues. If members are concerned that that is not achievable, there is a way that we could adjust the conditions so that it's related to 12 funeral events rather than burials, and burials could still take place on the John Conwyn Drive access without actually having the additional funerals. So it's the access rather than the burials is the issue. So if it's the funeral events, the condition could be amended if members so wished, so that it was just be the 12 funeral events. And again, the applicant is satisfied with that.
Thank you, Mel. I've got Pat Ager, and then I've got Andy Roberts, and then I've got Karen.
Since we're on the subject, it might be worth adding something about the thoughts that we did have this morning, again without prejudice, which was that it's always possible that the developers or could notify the council when there had been 10 burials, so that if a new arrangements needed to be altered, that discussion could take place before it became critical at 12. So that was always a thought, so it's something to consider now. As regards the overall application, it's in the green belt, and normally we don't accept applications in the green belt unless there's a clear community benefit. And I don't think there could be a clearer community benefit than the provision of a cemetery for a section of the community that desperately needs it. And also the additional amenities that you might normally expect in other cemeteries as well. So, you know, there will be not a chapel of rest precisely, but an area such as a chapel of rest would have, and other, you know, facilities for mourners such as toilets and so forth. And it doesn't, the current burial ground currently doesn't have those. I think it's important that we consider that we are providing something tremendously important here for the community, and it does comply with policy, therefore. I did think the screening might be necessary for that office block, but since they weren't there until after the cemetery was there, I'm not sure that that's really an issue. They're just going to have to put up with it, to tell the truth. Other than that, the access issues, there is a management plan here in the conditions to control access so that the number of burials and the respect for the site is maintained. And of course, the council is going to keep control of the gated access route. So that seems to me to address most of the problems. There is the cycleway round the back there. But when we looked at that, it seemed to be well used, and it was respectfully used and so on. I don't think there's going to be a real issue around that. So I would be in favour of approving this. In fact, I can see a lot of work's gone into trying to make this as good an application as possible.
Thank you, Pat. I've got Andy Roberts.
Chair, I was going to move something, but if somebody else wants to speak first, it might be best for me to listen to that before I move.
Andy, thank you. In which case I've got Karen, and then I've got James, and then I've got Marjorie.
Thank you, Chair. When I look at this application, the two proposed buildings, I think they're really sweet and very sensitively designed. And with the proposed pavilion building, I'm just wondering whether other uses other than funerals are planned. For example, it could be that people want to even hire it because it just looks so nice. I don't know. Would there be any other uses at all on the site? Because, you know, sometimes like memorials and something, you know, sensitive for families. You know, if you've got families here, it could be that they want to visit, perhaps. So how will they gain access then? Will it be a private arrangement with the council? Thank you.
I'm going to answer, and then if I get it wrong, I'll be hauled. So they can still access those buildings from the main entrance, which is before you get onto the gravel path, and they could use that if they wanted to enter there. But the access through the back of the site is only 12 allocations, and the council have to physically go and open the gate for them. But if it was a single, you know, a couple of people wanted to go up and sit and mourn or whatever they wanted to do, then they would still be able to access from the other side, because the path would go through what is now the fence, as you saw, and be able to access it that way, Karen. So yeah. Thank you, Karen. I've got James, I've got Marjorie, and then I've got Alan.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'd actually like just to echo the points made by Councillor Agar. This is a really significant and important enhancement of this provision. The community, you know, these are really sensitive moments in any family's sort of narrative, if you like, and we should do whatever we can to make that as respectful to them as is possible. I mean, I think the point was made by one of the objectors that the site itself is by the enhancement of it, that they have a problem through actually, you know, the sort of location in terms of their windows. Well, I think it was pointed out on the site visit this morning, this is no closer to that building than was the case beforehand. And whilst I respect the right of anyone to make an objection, I'm firmly behind this. I think it's absolutely right that we should agree this, and hopefully it goes forward quite quickly.
Thank you, James. Marjorie.
Thank you, Chair. Going in through that south entrance this morning, there are large numbers of bins, and I believe that there's still a problem about where those bins are going to be stored, and it's obviously not going to be a very nice, you know, way in if we found nowhere for those bins. So that's I know that's not really an issue for the planning committee, but it's something that the council has to sort. And the other thing is the recommendation. I just wonder if the chair and vice chair of this committee should be involved in looking at that biodiversity report. And also, especially if it does raise new issues, then what would happen? So that's it.
Marjorie, thank you. The process would be that the biodiversity report would have to come in and officers would take their professional view of it. I guess if it doesn't meet their standard, if it doesn't meet the requirement, then the application would come back. Yeah, we'd have to have a look again, yeah.
If there were any new issues or ecological issues that hadn't been raised that have already been discussed within the report, we would represent that back to the committee. It's not something that we wish to take that away from you, but if there are exactly the same issues raised and that there are no ecological issues, the recommendation is that then it could be granted planning permission.
Margie, if we just build on what you were saying, and I do know I've got to come to Councillor Amos here, but when we looked into that bin store, I think my former sergeant major would have put it politely as unsightly, and I think what we're going to get with the new cemetery, if it's approved, is a far nicer biological and ecological area, on the condition that it meets the standards, which will be better for everyone, not just the people who are using it, but actually even people walking past and everything. So I thought I'd make that comment. But I've got Councillor Amos.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've no objection whatsoever in principle to this. Just some practicalities that I think would be helpful to be clarified. The first one is about the numbers, which I suppose is Councillor Alcott's question, really. It seems a very large extension for 12 a year. Now, again, I don't have a particular problem with how many it is, but if it's going to be done on the basis of 12, we need some kind of assurance that it will remain at 12. Otherwise, apply for a higher figure so we know what we're talking about. It says in paragraph, whatever it is, paragraph 6, that the events will be monitored and controlled and limited to 12 a year. And I think the officer said that will be conditioned. But my views on conditions are well known, Mr. Chairman, which is that you put a condition on and then under delegated powers usually, the officer can amend it or remove it. So I'm not sure how strong a condition is. But anyway, that's what it is. So I'm just expressing my concern about the number. Whatever it is, it just needs to be adhered to, like anything in planning. The second point is about the public right of way, and I know Ms Hanchett would like to respond to this, because otherwise she thinks she's been here for no good purpose. But it's, in my view, generally, that cars and pedestrians don't always mix very happily. And what we've got in paragraph 6, it talks about the potential conflict with pedestrians and cyclists on the well-used paths. So I'm assuming, you know, they're well used. It says that. Then it says also further on that the county council is responsible for maintaining the rights of way to a standard suitable for their usual public use only, which is as a footpath. But I understand it, Mr. Chairman, if vehicles are going down here, there's not just the conflict, it's a question of the maintenance of it. I saw quite a few puddles, if I was looking at the right picture. So again, just clarification on that, because the next paragraph goes on to talk about it will introduce unnecessary conflict with pedestrians on these well-used paths. So that's that. And the third thing is, again, the flooding. Again, I think we need to be mindful of giving permission in a floodplain, whether it's, you know, zones 1, 2 or 3. I remember it wasn't that long ago, I won't name it in public, I can tell you after the meeting if you want, Mr. Chairman, But we had a similar discussion on another application about building something in a floodplain, but it was going to be on stilts, so it was okay. Rather ironically, before it got built, we had one of our Worcester floods, and had the building been built, it would have been flooded, even though we were told it wouldn't, because it was in a floodplain, but only at a very low level. So I'm very sceptical of giving permission for something in a floodplain, because we know what's happening to the climate. So what's happening now is frankly unpredictable. But obviously, if people want to take that risk, then that's up to them. But you know, I'd rather not be associated with such a risk, because it says again in that long paragraph 6. All of these areas may be inundated during flood events according to available flood risk mapping. But again, I'm not an expert, Mr. Chairman, on this, but my understanding is that every time we have these exercises, we wait a year, we've had another major flood, and everything is worse than we think it is. So there you are. They're my concerns, Mr. Chairman. You know, I wouldn't want to vote against it, simply because, you know, I understand the need and why not really. But I think they are genuine concerns. I'd like some reassurance on.
Councillor Evans, thank you. If I pick up your concern on the access to how do we control it at 12, it's a question that was asked when we were out today. And the simple point is, we hold the keys. They can't open the gate. So they have to come to officers to ask for the gate to be open. And I'm sure officers will have a little tally somewhere. It's been opened once, twice, 3, and when you get to 9 or 10, as Councillor Agar alluded to, if you were potentially halfway through the year and there had been more funerals than anticipated, then there would need to be a discussion, one would assume. And then someone would have to make a decision whether it comes back to planning chair or whether that is made by officers. I'm not really neither here nor here, but in terms of control, I would suggest that is more control than we have on any other type of thing, in terms of they can't open the gate because we have the key. So we're not giving a key to the applicant. So I think that answers that question, I hope. Referenced highways and flooding, and I'm not an expert either, but I'll go with the Environmental Agency's paper. But highways, Ms. Henship.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Amos.
You don't mean that, do you? You don't mean that at all.
It's always a joy to see you, Alan, as you know.
I've written it down.
As members will see, this is a 2019 planning application, and we are now in 2022. So we have had protracted negotiations with the applicant on this to understand all of the highways issues and to ensure that we are content with everything. As you've already heard about the condition limiting the number of funerals to 12, you know, the imposition of that condition and the management plan so that the City Council will retain control of that means that, you know, our concerns have all been overcome. In terms of the width of the path and vehicles and safety with pedestrians, at its minimum width, the path is 4.1 metres, which is a sufficient width for vehicles to safely pass pedestrians. And unfortunately, you weren't on the site visit this morning, but the nature of the path is vehicles will have to travel slowly the path anyway, so we do not have a concern with that. In terms of maintenance, you're absolutely correct. The County Council will only maintain that path to its intended use, which is as a public right-of-way. And I'm pretty sure that we've asked for a condition requiring that the City Council will have to maintain it in order to for vehicular use. I'm pretty sure that's correct, Paul.
Can't quite see that condition at the moment. But ultimately, the City Council own that track, and it will be a responsibility to be able to make sure that any access along there is safely done, both by pedestrians and vehicles. So they would need to make sure that that happens. It's a responsibility as the landowner.
So, Councillor, when we walked it today, we discussed it is in pretty good condition. There was some puddles there, but they're like an inch deep. So any roadworthy vehicle would have no issue in its current state of traversing that vehicle. There are plenty of worse highways and you should know as a county councillor and former cabinet member for highways, not on my watch, out around the county. So, yeah. And the final question was, Paul? Flooding, thank you.
In respect of flooding, the site as we set out within the presentation is split in two. So flood zone 1 is a bit of a misnomer really, because it's outside the floodplain. So it's in an area that's not at risk of flood. So in terms of the extension to the burial ground, that is all in flood zone 1, so it is not at risk of flood. The only areas that are at risk of flood are the car parking area and the pavilion in that peace garden. So if the car park is under flood, it just won't be able to be used. But there is no danger in terms of the office or where the main activities will take place. They are not at risk of flood.
Excellent.
Thank you, they're helpful answers. But just on your first point, if I may, and this is the difficulty I've got with the number. I mean, clearly, if the number did reach 12, and then there was a request for another number, given we all accept the sensitivity of that, I don't think we're in a position to say, no, you can't have one more. And that is my concern. I mean, I wouldn't want to object to it or stand in the way of that, obviously, and nobody would. So that's just my concern about the numbers. And therefore, once you breach the number, which obviously is subject to a condition, we then got a problem. And I frankly don't know how you would deal with that.
I take your point, Alan, and if my memory is correctly, the peak number of burials in a year was during the COVID crisis, and it went up to 15. Prior to that, it was in the region of 9 and 10. So I think it would be any increase on the 12 would be an exception as opposed to the rule, understanding, as Councillor Regal's pointed out, the sensitivities of such a request. But I think we can be assured that it's not going to be 100 and it's not going to be 50. So the difference between 10, 11, 12, maybe it's 13 one year, it's 9 the next year. I think the risk is, for me, is not sufficient that it would cause great concern from a highways perspective, and I think that's why highways have come to the decision they've come to as well.
Just make it clear, Mr. Chair. I mean, I personally don't have any objection to whatever the number is. My only point is, because it's subject to a condition which are pretty flimsy, frankly, just whatever we agree, it's a condition that's realistic and is going to be honoured. Otherwise, increase it to 20 now, and I don't mind. I have no objection to it.
And I think that's what I was trying to reinforce, that the condition based on historical data of the number of funerals in a given year, it is a reasonable number to expect. And I know the applicant is happy with that number as well. And if you're pedantic, the applicant, I know even more, will always push for an extra yard. Yeah. So if he's happy with 12, yeah, no, I don't blame him either. But I do have a proposer in Councillor.
If I may speak.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Round, Paul's got something he wants to add.
And if it's helpful to members, and there's been some comments in terms of the sensitivity of the condition, particularly around the limit to burials, the condition could be reworded so that it would be 12 funeral events, so that the limit is on the funeral event rather than the burial itself, because obviously the sensitivity of being able to bury is obviously, that's the sensitive issue. To carry out the funeral event is actually an event that can be done from John Conwyn Drive. Yes, the car parking may not be sufficient, but for the additional amount of events that may or may not occur, it takes away some of that concern that the community are not going to be able to carry out those burials because of the planning condition, and it would help officers in terms of the flexibility based on events rather than the burials. I don't know if that helps members if they wanted to look at the condition in that way.
If I could just add, Chair, I think that we could amend the conditions so that what it actually does is restrict the use of the access road on the southern part of the site to 12 times per year. And then if they did need to do another burial, that wouldn't be prohibited by the condition, but they wouldn't be able to use the car park for that funeral. So the restriction wouldn't be on the number of burials, it would be on the use of the access road to use the car park for that burial.
If members are happy with that, and I'm getting nods, then we've got some words written down here, so I'll just add those at the end. But anyway, I've got Councillor Andy Roberts.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. On that caveat, I'm happy to move approval I think probably we've been a bit too fussy about this 12 thing. It's for fear of causing offence, I know that, but I'm sure we can overcome that. But there's a certain irony about this whole thing. When you look above me, there's William Laslett. 160 years ago, 170 years ago, William Laslett gave the city Ashwood Cemetery. And Ashwood Cemetery, the purpose of Ashwood Cemetery was that it was for all. So, you know, I mean, it was Church of England or Catholic, and it was for all. In fact, the first person who buried them was a Catholic. It's a bit of a sad point, really, that 160, 170 years later, we're still having to discriminate, not only in life and death. You know, of course I approve this. I understand this is a section of the Muslim community and this means a great deal to them. It's just my wish that in the next 170 years, we won't have to segregate burial grounds.
We've had a proposal with the amended recommendation. I've got a seconder in Councillor Agar. So those who agree with the recommendation with the amended caveat at condition 9, please raise your hands.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Those against?
None.
And abstentions?
1.
Thank you. So that is approved with the amended condition 9 that you've got written there. So we now move on to agenda item 10, which, switching between screens, is the application for Purderswell Park, John Conwyn Drive. Again, similar location, and those people who were able to be on the site visit this morning had the opportunity to have a closer look at the ground where this application is for. And I think it's Paul again, isn't it?
It is.
Julian, I think you might have to manually do this.
No, I'm afraid not.
The battery's running out. Thank you, Julian.
Yeah, if you could stop the slideshow. Yes, thank you. I'll give this a brief resume, members. This is an application at Purderswell Park, which is an office development located to the west of Purderswell Park. And there are two elements to this application, and both outlined in red. I'll just go through some photos of the site. This is the access from John Conwyn Drive, and the application site is the green area to the left-hand side. And you can see it a little bit closer. It originally was part of the landscaping scheme for the office block when it was originally constructed. It's since been changed simply down to a few large shrubs. You can see the office development beyond and the footpath link that takes you around by the side of the new academy school and to the rear of the site. That's looking back along that footpath back on towards the site. That's a bit of a closer sight to it. And looking down towards the office development, and you can see the Grade 2 listed stable block from the former Purderswell House in the background, and that's looking back towards John Conwyn Drive. That's a Google Street View picture from 2009, and you can see the landscaped area which is now being removed. So the application relates for a new office block and additional parking for the office park. And you can see that location, that's the location of the office block, and that's the location of the car parking. The Applications, both the car parking and the office block, are located within the green space allocation under policy 38. The office block is contained within the green belt, although, as you can see from the screen, that the car parking area is not in the green belt. The green belt boundary is that indicated in green. As rehearsed previously, the South Worcestershire Development Plan indicates that the NPPF shows forward those things that are suitable in policy terms from the green belt. And the officer report sets out very clearly that the office block is inappropriate development, and that the development as a whole, including the additional car parking, has not been justified for the reduction of green space under policy 38. The location of the development outside the city centre, again, has not been justified, and the NPPF is absolutely clear that it sets a preference sequentially to sites that are accessible and connected within or to the edge of the city centre. The Grade 2 listed stable block at the Fermor Purdiswell House is located in the centre of the office block, and the report sets out how the heritage considerations and their impact. The office block will consist of 3 stories in height at the entrance of the site. You can see the 3 stories, and it's a speculative development. You can see that they are arranged in, as you would expect, in speculative form for the office space over 3 floors. It will be rectangular in format and constructed out of brick with a flat roof. Got some street scenes just to help members, and I've imposed the photos that you saw earlier. So you can see how the office block will appear taller than the existing office blocks around it, and also you can see that it will be substantially taller and in view of the Grade 2 listed building. That would be the side elevation, and I have to point out to members that the section there is from the opposite side, but I've showed the side that faces the drive, and that would be looking from the rear, and you can see how that it indicates it as a flat piece of land, but you can actually see the elevation of the site. It is not a flat site, it has actually got some elevation, so the building will be taller on the skyline. The design of the office block is considered within the report as being out of kilter with the surrounding development, and would also reduce the open feel and the landscaped aims of the development as originally designed. The car parking down to the south is located adjacent to the listed building and also removes green space and landscaping which affects the listed building setting. Members will notice that concerns over drainage and inadequate justification for car parking provision have also been put forward. And whilst it is accepted that parking is required, this need has to be adequately justified. At the moment, we do not know whether it is sufficient or insufficient, and that has not been provided based on the total usage of the office park. And it's certainly the office block is not in a way that the parking is not located in a way that is acceptable, both with the layout of the park or its position, taking account of the listed building. And so, therefore, the development is inappropriate development within the green belt. It removes green space without justification. It would be unsuitably located outside the city centre, and it provides an unacceptable design response that would harm the character and setting of the listed building. Inadequate information has been provided to satisfy drainage, parking and sustainable credentials as required by the development plan. And therefore, members, the application is recommended for refusal for the 7 reasons set out within the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. I'll open I've got Councillor Amos, Councillor Agar, Alan, and then I've got Mel.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm staggered by this recommendation, frankly. I'm staggered. And I think there's some kind of irony, is there not? Here's an application for jobs, 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 and we turn it down, or the recommendation is to turn it down. In this city, we're building residential everywhere, even rabbit hutches, as you know, Mr. Chairman, although we try to turn those down. So what's happening? People come to Worcester, and they travel out of Worcester, usually by car to work, and they come back into Worcester by car to work. Here we've got an office. Hopefully some local people would work there. But no, we're told to turn it down because it's unacceptable. It's inappropriate. I mean, pretty strong words, frankly. And then paragraph 8.2 is what I really want to pick up on. The proposed office use is unacceptable due to the out-of-town centre location. Well, surely, if you're going to have workers coming and going, and the chances are they're going to be going by car, is it not better they're out of the city centre? The city centre, I don't know whether people have noticed, can be quite congested with traffic. So to have it out of town makes sense. This is why supermarkets can provide free car parking, because they're out of town. Now, apparently, we're told, because the paragraph goes on, which is what I'm staggered. I've never seen this before. Obviously, I must be out of touch. Is that development should be strategically directed to Worcester city centre. I mean, are we really saying that places of work have got to be in the city centre? I guarantee it, about 5 o'clock tonight, because it's a Thursday. Thursday's always the worst day. Well, they've got roadworks on London Road again anyway. But you try and get from my division in Bedwardine to the other side of the city this evening, and you won't do it in, but take about half an hour. So there's clearly congestion, but what we're saying is, as a committee presumably, is that we want more congestion in the city centre, because these places have to be directed to the city centre. And then it says it's even worse, Mr. Chairman, it's even worse. And then presumably if we can't have it directed to Worcester city centre, we're then told, this is Worcester City Planning Committee, we're then told that these applications must be located to locations within the town centres of Droitwich Spa, Evesham and Malvern. So what we're saying is we don't want workers here, put them on the edge, that's not right, we put them in the middle, but if there's not room in the middle, then we send them to somewhere else. We send our workers, we send our workforce to Droitwich Spa, Evesham and Malvern. I think people of Worcester might like a few jobs as well. We're building houses, but we're not providing jobs. So I am staggered by that. And I'm also staggered by the bit in 8.3 and what the officer's been telling us about their problems with adequate surface water drainage at this site. Can I remind the committee, Mr. Chairman, about half an hour ago, we were told that there were problems on the Northwick Park site about sewage. Oh, that doesn't matter, just grant planning permission, we'll sort that out later. Here, because there are problems with water drainage, surface water drainage, we're told that we shouldn't go ahead with it. On the other application, Northwood Park, we're told, yeah, there are sewage problems, we'll sort them out. So I find this double standards, and I'm amazed that we should be wanting to turn this down and turn away jobs. I think people actually need jobs.
Thank you, Councillor Amos. I'm going to ask, you've got no comment on the, because I know you like your policy, us to adhere to policy, and it is directly opposed to our green policy statement. I just wondered whether you had a comment.
Oh, I do. Oh, if you're writing a comment, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to give a comment. What I found, and I love it, because we have our planning policy framework is the SWDP, and that is more honoured in the breach than the reality. How many times have you and I, Mr. Chairman, sat at this meeting and we've been told, well, no, this bit of land is not in the SWDP, residential, of course, it's not in the SWDP, but we can still approve it. So it brings into question the whole purpose of the SWDP. So when that's quoted to me, I said, well, I'm happy to be as consistent in opposing as opposed to approving something. So 1 minute we're told, not in the SWDP, but we can still approve it anyway. So, you know, when it comes to consistency, Mr. Chairman, this is a bit of green land that makes no difference to anybody or anything, but obviously we don't want the jobs. Fine, employers will take note.
I think it's NPFF that it's in, as opposed to the SWDP. But anyway, I'll stand corrected. Anyway, we go to Councillor Agar. Pat.
Thank you, Chair.
Can you douse some flames on this meeting?
Well, Councillor Amos has raised a number of issues, and I do take issue with some of them, Councillor. We normally find ourselves in agreement, but I'm afraid we don't on this occasion. Firstly, this is in the green belt, and there is no clear community benefit at all, or no effort has been made to make that case. And if they had made the case, well, that might have been different, but they didn't make the case. So this is contrary to policy. You know, if we start taking chunks out of the green belt now, where's it all going to end? Would you like to tell me that? You know, the SWDP is a partnership effort, and the strategic issues about where jobs go have been well considered. There are lots of jobs coming to Worcester. I can assure you they aren't all office jobs, but there are a lot of jobs coming to Worcester. Some of them have to go elsewhere. It's just one of those things. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a partnership, we wouldn't have agreement, we wouldn't get the kind of development we need in Worcester. You'll have a chance to have your say on that any time from this week onwards, because the SWDP review has just been published and the consultation period has started. So, folks, you know, have your say. I think actually that not only is this in the green belt, which is completely contrary to policy, there's no community benefit. The destruction of the green context of the listed building, well, the historic building which is nearby, doesn't cause me any joy at all. I think actually we should take account of that too. The car parking is clearly in the wrong place. It takes up green space, not green belt, I agree. But, you know, I don't think any of them are going to want to walk that far in the rain anyway to the office block that's proposed. I just don't see how this could work. So I think absolutely I will propose refusal, please.
Thank you, Pat. I've got Mel Alcourt, and then I've got Councillor Andy Roberts. Then I've got Karen and Marjorie.
Chair, thank you. Yeah, I mean, the application is in the green belt, and once we start chipping away at that, you know, that is the end really. In so many areas already people are upset, and I know they're very concerned in claims about building it on green fields and in the green belt, and this is in the green belt, and so there's absolutely no way that I could recommend it. We just shouldn't be doing that. It's one of the few precious pieces of land that we have, and I know in some other counties they have looked to start building on the green belt, but it really is the thin end of the wedge, and I think for that reason and for that reason alone I won't be able to support this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mel. I've got Andy, then Karen, then Marjorie.
I've a great deal of sympathy with what Alan says. Of course, everything about our ways of life is predicated on us being able to work and earn money, so I get that. But as I understand it, first, there's no relevance to the previous matter we considered, because that was an outline issue and the details were yet to be done. This isn't in the same way. But the point is, I'm slightly different from Mal on this. Mal says there's no circumstances. Well, I don't agree with that. As I understand it, you can build on the green belt if there's an exceptional circumstances for development. And I don't think that threshold has been met here. In fact, when we looked at this building, proposed building, we drove down the road and there's in a modern concept, quite a beautiful building that's been built, really exceptional. And then we get to this and it looks like it must have taken half an hour to design. It's like an inverted or cardboard box stood on its end with some windows in, and there we are, there's the design. It doesn't seem to have had any thought about anything, and then we'll plonk it on top of the green belt. So I think the officers have got it right. It hasn't been displayed. There are exceptional circumstances of development at this point. But, unlike Mel slightly, I'm not saying that can never happen.
Thank you, Andy. I've got Karen.
Thank you, Chair. Due to the location, I'm surprised that the application doesn't include more travel planning measures. You know, the highways have, in their response, detailed their concerns, and it's a shame really that the application didn't consider those with the submission. It's quite normal with this kind of application to have a design and access statement, and that there isn't one. And I think for this site, it's really important because it isn't a central location, and obviously people will go by car, and actually people need to do something about that, because actually the junction at Purdyswell, the roundabout there, can be extremely congested already. We have problems around that area already. So due to the fact of the site, I think that's a miss. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Marjorie.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to address this question of office space. When we're looking at building houses, we know that we've got a shortage of houses, but do we know that we have a shortage of office space? Maybe there's plenty of office space in the city centre that's not being used. But even if we'd used up all the office space, I still wouldn't think this was an appropriate place to put an office block. That's quite a pleasing collection of buildings that we have down there at the moment. And I think in particular the old stable block is beautiful. And I'm quite sure that putting this box next to it would have a serious effect on the whole area. So I'm opposed to this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Marjorie. I've got James.
Chair, thank you. Excuse me. I'd like to, I think the critical point has been made by Andy Roberts. Have they reached the threshold of exceptional circumstances here? In my view, no, they haven't. If we proceed down this road, we ultimately, I know we look at each individual application on its own merits, and I get that. But you breach a principle, I think, and once you've done that, then the outcomes ad infinitum are very uncertain. And in my judgment, this particular application, and I get Alan's point about jobs, I 100% get it, but we have to look at the much wider picture here, and I simply don't think this application meets enough of the criteria we set to reach the threshold that Andy refers to. So no.
Thank you, James. I have some sympathy with Councillor Amos as well, and actually I think potentially this is a wasted opportunity for the developer, because if they had come up with a community asset, there are plenty of, there's only three reasons why you break Greenbelt: one sport and leisure, one's a community asset, and the other is an exceptional circumstance, and none of that evidence has been provided, which I think might have put us in a different position if you consider that there are a lot of office blocks and parking in that area. So for an exceptional standard, it might have crossed the threshold, but I don't simply see it's crossed the threshold. So I will struggle to support this as well. But I do have Jill.
Thank you, Chair. I just really had a question. Do we have a view of how much office space is needed in the city in the same way we do with housing?
We've got Nick Cat at the back, he might be able to answer, but I'm sure Paul can answer. My understanding is there is a business demand for more good quality office space in the city centre. And there are plenty of reasons for that. One, because people can come in by public transport, because we've got trains. Two, people like working in the city centre because they can go out and grab a sandwich and a coffee, and that builds the city. But so we have a lack of, there is a perceived shortage of good quality office space in the city centre. Whether there's a shortage of office space, I'm happy to turn to officers who will advise.
In answer to the question, as part of the development plan, there's no specific requirement for a certain amount of office space. So it's not the same as we've got a housing requirement that we need to meet in terms of office space. But as the Chairman quite rightly said, there is an understanding in terms of what we need to do in terms of providing good quality office space. And just as a comment, as we're talking about office space, members who went on the site visits will have noticed as we walked round the site that there was quite a number of vacant office spaces within Purderswell Park at the moment. So in terms of the office space and the requirement, the applicants certainly haven't demonstrated that there is a need for this development. There is certainly adequate space to be able to be let already at Purderswell Park that probably should be taken first before we look at anything new.
And Joe, if I can just elaborate on that a little bit, as Pat and I walked round, I'm sure it was Pat I was talking to, we commented on how nice some of those offices were that were there in terms of the number of outdoor balconies, sitting areas that you could go outside and engage with in the environment from your office without actually having to physically leave the building as such. So that they were of a high standard building. They're quite old buildings as well, in 30 years old, someone told me. So yeah, compared to those buildings that were there, it doesn't hit the right mark. But anyway, so we've had a proposer. Oh, sorry, Councillor Amos wants to come back.
Chair, may I ask you a question? On the grounds that you have a well-earned reputation of being a great intellect. So do you or do you not agree with the statement that office development should be strategically directed to Worcester city centre. That's what it says, paragraph 8.2. And then if there isn't any space there, although we keep converting ex-office spaces into residential, do we not? So I find that a bit ironic. We're now saying we haven't got any, well, we convert them into residential, so we haven't got any, you're quite right. So they strategically directed to Worcester city centre, not Worcester centre. Then, if there aren't any or any suitable, then we should be directing these employers to Droitwich, Evesham and Moorfield. Do you think that's right?
As always, I'm happy to be drawn into making a statement that might get me in trouble. I do believe that from a business perspective, I would prefer office space to be in the city centre. One, because I think it's better for the city, it makes it a more thriving city. And two, because of the, I'm going to get so much stick for this. No, hopefully support for this. Because actually it enables people to access the city centre using public transport far easier than having to use cars all the time. And I know I'm one who uses my car far more than I probably should. So on that side, yeah, I'm not necessarily saying that I want to send off, if we can't do that, I want to send potential businesses outside of the city. So on that point, I would agree with you. But the wording can be taken both ways. But anyway, we've had a proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your car is in the car park just outside.
Yeah, my diesel car is in the
just
car
wanted to
park.
clarify that.
I know, but I will be going for a walk later on today without my vehicle. So I'm happy now that we've had a proposer. Councillor Amos has had a chance to give me a hard time, so this is normally how these things work. And have I got a seconder for this? So I've got a seconder in Karen. So if we would go for the recommendation before us, which is to refuse this application for the reasons stated at paragraph 9, could I have a show of hands in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Those against?
1.
Any abstentees? So that application is refused in accordance with the recommendation of the paper. Thank you. I must excuse myself now because I have a conflict of interest potentially with this application. I will come back for any other business.
Oh, good God, chair's through.
Sabotage. Yeah. That's just snapped. The legs just dropped off, yeah. Yeah. Now look, you see the mould? It's woodwork.
Sorry, do you want to?
Okay. I'm so glad I'm insured because that chair's probably worth a fortune.
Right. I think it had woodburn, councillor. Okay, are we? If you'd like to present, please.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd just like to draw members' attention to the additional information provided in the late paper. This is an application for demolition of the existing weighing room to be replaced with a new timber frame building to provide jockey facilities in weighing area at the established racecourse in Worcester. The application is presented to committee because the council is the freehold owner of the application site. The site is located to the immediate east of the River Severn, which is a local wildlife site and falls within the Riverside Conservation Area, an archaeological sensitive area, flood zone 3, the red zone in the Development Plan Policy 28, and is designated green space. The wider site, outlined in blue, comprises the established racecourse with its associated buildings and service areas. The application site, which is outlined in red, comprises the building accommodating the existing jockeys' facilities, a a restroom, changing rooms, toilets and showers, along with a weighing room and broadcast office. Permission is sought to remove the building but retain the existing brick columns and stanchions on which it sits and which elevate it above ground level and provide an enlarged replacement building. The proposed site plan indicates the enlarged floor area as grey over the outline of the existing floor area to the northwestern part of the site. It also shows the existing barrier fencing to the front of the building, which will be modestly relocated to provide a larger area of open space. This larger scale proposed site plan shows the increased rectangular floor area, which would be also elevated above ground level in relation to the existing stalls and the parade ring. Levels are flat on site but fall away steeply to the river towpath to the rear of the building. The existing building has a simple dual-pitched roof over a rectangular footprint. The structure is elevated above the lateral ground levels with a stepped access to the front. The side elevations on the right-hand side of the slide indicate the steeply sloping ground to the river towpath. The proposed building is contemporary in design, with a monopitch roof that oversails the principal elevation, which continues to be orientated towards the racecourse, and incorporates a flat roof section to accommodate upper floor use. The outline of the existing structure is shown in blue for comparison. Elevations would be treated in natural coloured timber cladding with vertical louvres to some upper floor windows under a standing seam roof. A condition is recommended requiring samples of the materials to be approved before use. The replacement building would utilise the existing subframe but would be elevated above ground level by a further 1.52 metres as required by the Environment Agency to accommodate updated flood events and provide for climate change. The proposed enhanced facility would be arranged over 2 floors and would provide increased changing room areas, showers and toilets for both male and female jockeys, valets and scales areas, broadcast office, warm-up areas, treatment areas, canteen and plant rooms. Recessed balconies are proposed to the rear riverside elevation and an external viewing platform to the front. This is a visual of the proposed principal elevation facing towards the parade ring. A photograph of the existing building shows it facing inwardly to the site with the parade ring in the foreground. The trees at either end are indicated to be removed on the submitted site plan, but the tree report suggests that the willow at the northern end of the building could either be retained or pollarded. Although there is a degree of ambiguity, the recommended landscaping condition would ensure that any removed trees are appropriately replaced to compensate for any loss. This photograph shows the existing building in relation to the grandstand, which is notably taller and also has a monopitch roof, and with other smaller scale ancillary buildings adjacent to it. This photograph is the northern end of the building to be replaced, with the rear elevation of the stalls on the left-hand side of the photograph. This is a photograph of the southern end of the building to be replaced, with the parade ring on the right-hand side. This shows the rear riverside elevation with evidence of an earlier external balcony. Again, these photographs are of the rear elevation as viewed from the opposite side of the river. They show its rather dilapidated appearance and elevated position in relation to the towpath and river, and how it sits in relation to the existing buildings, including the grandstand, which can be seen on the right-hand side of the bottom photograph. This view from the towpath is of the northern end gable of the existing building, filtered currently by the existing willow. This is a view from within the racecourse with the building's position marked by the red arrow and shows its relationship and layout in relation to the existing buildings when viewed from the southeast. This view is from the northeast part of the racecourse and again shows the existing building and proposed siting of the replacement building within its context. It is considered that the proposal would maintain the existing linear layout, and despite being taller, it would not compromise the essential quality and character of this section of green space, subject to appropriate landscaping such that it would record with Development Plan Policy 38, and would also preserve the character and appearance of the Riverside Conservation Area. The Conservation Officer has no objections, subject to a condition in respect of the materials. These are more distant views, further demonstrating the range and scale of buildings along the western side boundary and how the replacement building would be read alongside them. And finally, this photograph from the western side of the river shows the wider context provided by the rowing club buildings and their facilities. The proposal comprises the replacement and significant enhancement of the existing Jockeys facilities. Although it's located in flood zone 3 and the red zone as set out in the Development Plan Policy 28, which typically does not permit new development or redevelopment, the Environment Agency has no objection on the basis of the scale of the existing floodplain in the locality, and that the revised floor levels would continue to allow floodwater to flow beneath, and it also provides an opportunity for a degree of betterment because the floor level would be higher than the existing floor level of the existing Jockey building. Furthermore, the use remains in the less vulnerable category. The Land Drainage Partnership concur. The agent has confirmed that the racecourse is signed up to the Environment Agency's flood warning scheme, and a construction environmental management plan is required by condition to ensure that demolition and construction would not adversely affect the River Severn local wildlife site. By virtue of its siting scale and design, the proposed replacement building is considered to preserve the character and appearance of the conservation area, and essential qualities of green space would not be compromised subject to appropriate landscaping. Biodiversity enhancement and renewable energy provision can be secured by conditions, and a condition requiring a programme of archaeological work is recommended to secure an investigation of any archaeological potential on site. The replacement building would provide an enhanced facility which would generate direct economic benefits during construction and for the racecourse thereafter, and also indirect economic and social benefits with the potential for increased visitors and resulting spend within the city. In terms of environmental objectives, whilst taller and having a larger floor area, overall the building would be a visual improvement compared to the existing and would benefit from greater insulation, fixed biodiversity habitats and solar panels. Although the loss of trees would have an initial adverse impact, over time, through appropriate replacement planting, this impact would be mitigated. When considered against the relevant development plan policies and giving due weight to the Environment Agency's statutory consultation response, it's considered that the benefits of the proposal outweigh any short to medium term adverse impacts, such that the proposal accords with the development plan when taken as a whole. It's therefore recommended that permission is granted, subject to the conditions set out in the report and the late paper. Thank you.
Oh, I did hope we could see the illustrations again, because I'd like a little reassurance. We've got lots of pictures from the east looking west, which is very important, but that's not what people see. People see from the east looking at the townscape, looking east towards the townscape. Now, this building will be higher than the timber frame building at the moment, but what I can't visualise is whether it has an impact. I know that there are views of the cathedral as you go down there, and I'm just interested in whether we're sacrificing any of those, and I can't. I bet you can find an illustration that will show me.
I didn't do that. Through you, Chair. I think the only photograph we have there is from the opposite riverbank, looking across to the grandstand. The cathedral is roughly in the area between, to my understanding, between the grandstand and the tree that you can see. I think it's too distant from my height on the riverbank. At the time of my site visit, I couldn't see it in that location. You probably can get a glimpse of it, obviously, along the riverbank.
Yeah, can I, through you, just ask, I recognise the grandstand is not a thing of beauty, I got that. But the buildings help me really. The buildings we're looking at, are they going to be removed? Are the ones where?
Through you, Chair. So the top photograph shows the rear of the building to be replaced, and on the bottom photograph, it's the one on the left-hand side. So you've seen about half of it.
And they're going to be replaced by a much bigger structure. Okay, okay. Thanks very much.
Can you clarify
Thank you, Chair. If I go back to the proposed elevations, I think the outline of the existing building on site is outlined in blue, so that probably gives you the best visual aid. So the bottom elevation number 3, I think it is. Sorry, my glasses don't seem to be. Yeah, elevation 3 on the bottom of the slide. That's the elevation that would face towards the river, with the top elevation 1 at the top facing in towards the racecourse. So from that image, you can see the extension, if we're looking at the front elevation, elevation 1, to the left-hand side, and then obviously the upward increase in height with the monopitch across the entirety of the site, and then with a section of flat roof to accommodate the first floor facilities.
If I can, Chair, I'm not suggesting that this is an offensive looking building, or that the thing that's there at the moment is something we should preserve, anything like this. Just, I would just wonder what the impact is if you're walking down the flood defences as people do. That's parallel to Hilton Road. Does it take anything away? I'm sure the officer would tell us if it did. Thank you.
It may be helpful just to note, members, that the Council's Conservation Officer has looked at this in detail and raises no objection as is set out within section 6. So those views have been looked at and have been considered to be that it will not have any impact on heritage assets.
Right, any other questions or comments?
I've just got a comment, Madam Chairman, tongue in cheek. Perhaps we could invite Councillor Mitchell to go and test the weighing station.
Has to happen there. You know, it's obviously not fit for purpose anymore. And it seems to me that this is a perfectly reasonable replacement. And if our conservation officer has no objections, I don't think I do. Anyone else? No? Any more comments? Can we move to the vote then? Oh yeah, I know. Yeah. So we need a proposer, please. Anyone want to? Thank you, James. Seconder? Thank you, Mel. Moving to the vote then. Those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. That's it for today. Thanks for coming.
I think there might be some other business.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Does anybody have any other business at this stage? Well, we better hang on for the chair to come back and make sure. Well, you never know. Oh, yes. Paul, you do have an update on the appeal, don't you? Yes, I can. That's fine. Yeah, we do have an update on an appeal, so it might be useful to know that.
I think they went into the green room. I think he was in the green room. They're in there.
Is he in there?
Yeah, they are.
Lovely.
Good. Just sign it back. Cheers, thank you. Thanks very much. I think that was the final agenda item. So, any other business? Yep. So, Paul is going to give us a bit of a back brief on appeal we've just had. So, Paul, over to you.
Members, I thought it might be useful just to report on an appeal decision that's come through on 1 to 6 Court Mews, which came before committee, which was an application for change of use from 48-bed student accommodation to a 46-bed homeless refuge house, which was refused by the City Council in terms of antisocial behaviour and the management of that, the living occupation, and also the impact upon the regeneration works within the city's centre. The appeal has been dismissed, which is really good news for the city, but principally on the grounds of the management of it, and that there was no confidence with the inspector that they could guarantee that there wasn't going to be any antisocial behaviour as a result of the use. He didn't feel that the reasons surrounding the impact on the regeneration works or the living conditions were suitable, and he found those to be acceptable, but dismissed the appeal on the antisocial behaviour. So that is a good win, but it's just mindful of members that should a more robust management plan come back, members will have to consider again what progress has been made in terms of regeneration and whether any future scheme addresses the concerns that we had in terms of daylight provision and such like. But it's an important win as an appeal, and I thought I'd bring that to the council's attention.
Thank you, Paul. I didn't see any hands raised for any other business, so thank you very much, members and officers, for support today. And I'd say enjoy the weekend, but we've got one more day left before the